We got stress cause we're striving, surviving, keep on moving to improving, rearranging, the whole world's changing.
Welcome to Minding the Gap. I'm Paul Bakke, licensed counselor with Behavioral Sciences of Alabama, and I'm joined by Dr. David Barnhart, and we're going to talk this morning about building a hierarchy for exposure. How are you doing today, Dr. Barnhart?
I'm doing pretty well. So what kind of exposure are you talking about?
Well, we're talking about, there's a lot of examples that we've talked about in the past of exposure and anxiety. We're going to talk a little bit more in detail about social anxiety today. But what we want to do is really want to introduce the idea of just really the process of building a hierarchy. And when I say hierarchy, we're talking about a list of things to do to sort of practice feeling the discomfort from some kind of anxiety provoking situation at a level where it's building from easiest to most difficult, so that we can face those provoking situations without avoiding them.
Yes, so that we eventually we habituate to the triggers, so they don't produce as much discomfort. And when we talk about levels of discomfort, you and I talk to people about trying to scale the discomfort, and we go from 1 to 10 usually, with
1 to 10, 10 being the worst.
Yes.
We call it a subjective unit of discomfort, or a SUD level.
SUD level. And I try to point out, we're not talking about having a beer. It's not that SUD level.
Or washing clothes.
Or washing clothes. None of that.
None of that.
Subjective units of discomfort.
So how uncomfortable are you? And that starts, the process starts really with what we call a stress log. So if somebody comes in and is talking about their anxiety, they're getting into what triggers those kinds of things, we would ask them to write down the triggers. Is that if they start to feel some level of discomfort when some kind of event happens, they would write it down. And so if you want to show that to our viewers here, we'd write down a real simple, the trigger there would be what's going on with you when you recorded the level. And then the emotion, what were you feeling? It might be anxiety, knot in your stomach. And what thoughts are you having in the moment that you're triggered? So you've got SUD level, and here in this case would be a 7 out of 10. That's pretty high.
Pretty high. A 10, we typically would think as if it's anxiety, it might be a panic attack.
That's a panic attack. That's the word. You can't get any worse. Panic attack. So seven's it's up there.
Yes.
In this case, this person is writing in their stress log, and they were invited to a party with a lot of people. There'd be a lot of people there. So that just idea created this stress, and so actually going to the party probably be even more difficult. And so the anxiety feeling is written down as a knot in their stomach. They're starting to become aware of where the anxiety is happening, level of anxiety, and then what are the thoughts. And so this is where we get into, what are you thinking? What is this core fear? This idea that's the core fear. And what if I say something stupid, or somebody doesn't like me, or there's some kind of negative evaluation, or somebody's or I don't even know what they're thinking about me. And that's a question a lot of people with social anxiety will ask themselves in their mind. What are they thinking of me? And they're not going to know what everybody's thinking of them, because people generally don't just tell you that out in the open.
I think you're pretty great. That could come out, It
could, but typically it doesn't. But that's a question that often doesn't get answered. And so the whole idea of this stress log is that these are likely things that have led to avoidance.
Yes.
not
Yes.
going to a party, not talking to people,
Mhm.
not looking at people, staying out of those situations where I might say something stupid, or they may not like me or think badly of me, or I get in a situation where I start wondering what they're thinking about me, and I can't handle that
Mhm.
thought and that question.
Well, and what often is going on, we talk about worst case scenarios. And so when we perceive something as a threat, we're thinking that something negative is going to come out of this situation.
Right.
And we imagine being embarrassed or people thinking that we look stupid. Well, maybe we have experience with being embarrassed,
Right.
and we probably have.
Mm-hmm. Doesn't feel good. It's
Maybe,
not comfortable.
yeah. So we've seen somebody made fun of, and we internalize that. It may not have happened to us, but if we see it happen, we can imagine what that would be like. And empathetically, we could feel some embarrassment.
And with teenagers are in a position in their development where they start thinking about what other people think of them, and it's
Yes. Oh,
identity
yes.
is the whole thing. And so it's a natural part of, use the example a lot of times of, the teenager that's got a pimple, and they just think everybody sees it, and
Mhm.
the probability that everybody else is worried about their own pimples is probably more likely. But to the teenager,
Mhm.
it's, everybody's looking at me, and it's, what are people going to think of me? So that's part of that age. That's just sort of a natural growth process. And
Mhm.
oftentimes parents will say, oh, don't worry about what people think of you. Well, how do I do that? How do I just decide to do that?
Oh,
That's
wait,
another.
wait a
Okay,
minute.
that makes
Can,
sense. Yeah.
can you just stop worrying about it?
That's right. And
Stop
so
worrying.
that's the part of it too, is there is some kind of avoidance that typically happens because our brains, when we sense something uncomfortable or anticipate something bad happening, our brain starts going to work at making it not happen.
Mhm.
And sometimes that's avoiding going places and talking to people and just staying to yourself. And sometimes that's just worrying about it. This
Mhm.
this hamster wheel of worry
Mhm.
that's attempting to solve the problem, and of course is not.
And by not engaging, we do not have the opportunity to disconfirm our beliefs.
Right.
And part of exposure is this opportunity to do some behavioral experiments to see what actually occurs.
Mm-hmm.
How does it turn out? And so I can learn from my experience.
Yeah. So after writing in the stress log, and this is an example of something that would have come up.
Mhm.
Okay, so now the process would move towards, okay, how does one build a hierarchy, a list of things to do to practice experiencing the discomfort, to
Mhm.
habituate to the discomfort, to get used to it, and hopefully ultimately disconfirm this belief.
Yes. Yes.
So the one idea, you want to show that one, show the hierarchy.
All right.
One idea would be to just make eye contact as you walk by.
Mm-hmm.
Walk by someone and make eye contact, maybe smile,
Mm-hmm.
nod. It's a typical
Well,
thing that
so
people will do.
when people have social anxiety, one of the ways they avoid
Don't
is
look.
don't look. Yeah.
Don't look.
Yeah. So don't look. And making direct eye contact is a little scary because it almost invites somebody to talk
Right. Or
or
or scowl
or yeah, or scowl. Yeah.
and give some kind of look
Yeah.
that triggers this idea of, what are they thinking of me?
Mm-hmm.
They must think I'm weird for looking at them,
Yeah.
whatever it is. So
Yeah.
it's leaning into the discomfort.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is where someone would write that down and whatever level of discomfort that would be. And we started with low. We didn't put the SUD level there, but that may be a 4 for someone.
Yeah. So we would, we'd put let's just say we'd put a 4 there.
Yeah. Okay. So then the next thing might be introduce myself to someone new at work or at church. So it's pretty comfortable environment for somebody who's familiar with this place.
Mm-hmm. You've seen the people before. Maybe you've sat in a chair or pew right around them, and you're accustomed to seeing them. So there's some habituation
Right.
that's already taken place.
And then talking to them is new. So that might be something that might be a 5,
Mm-hmm.
kind of a mid-level.
Let's just take a guess. And
Those
people
three.
can rate these things different ways. And when they enter them on a hierarchy, they don't necessarily have to be in order.
That's right. That's right.
And usually they're not. So they'll just be different levels that we've identified. And then that allows us to put it into a hierarchy going from lower anxiety provoking to higher.
Right. Next example would be to ask for help in a store. And that may be a 3 because they're used to that. The people are there to help other people. That might be a thought.
Mm-hmm.
It's not anything unusual, but it would be a practice to do that, to just sort of, it's practice.
Exactly. Yeah. And when you and I are working with folks, we'll send people or go with them. We do get our hands dirty, so we're trying to help somebody move in a different direction. Sometimes we would actually be accompanying them, not as a support, and to encourage and help them prepare for what they're about to do.
Right.
But for some people, this is a very hard thing to ask somebody for help.
Yeah.
And we're not sending them out to buy new clothes. We're just pretending. So you go up to somebody and you say, hey, I'm looking for a blue dress shirt or a sporty skirt to wear when I play tennis, whatever, but we're not actually going to buy it. So there's, there's this, we've created this situation for exposure. It's contrived. We've made it up so we can get the experience to do that.
It's practice being in the situation, feeling the feeling, and surviving.
Yes.
And ultimately going, okay, that was okay. And I tolerated the feeling. And how many times have you heard when we've had clients that are starting this process and they're going to do something difficult, they say, it wasn't as bad as I thought.
Yeah, all the time. Yes.
Sometimes the anxiety, the anticipatory anxiety is worse. That just thinking about doing it makes me not do it. And then once they do it, it's like, oh, that wasn't so bad. But that's the power of the mind. The mind really makes us believe that it's going to be really bad when, there's no opportunity, like you said, to disconfirm that by doing it if they don't do it.
And this, but basically what we're talking about here is in vivo or in person, in life exposure. But we can do preparation even for that, even for doing this. We may do imaginal or imagined exposures. Or do things that we've contrived in the workspace or in the home in order to get some habituation before we even make the trip out to the world.
Yeah, that's where we may do a worst case scenario about, wrote a story about I went to this party and everybody was looking at me and I heard people whispering and my anxiety went up, and they go into the worst case scenario and they would repeat that until their level went down, and they just got used to that worst case. And so the chances of them going and it being somewhere in between the worst case and the best is they're just taking that chance. I'll see what happens. typically if someone is habituated to the worst case, they're okay with what happens.
Absolutely. Yes. You know,
So
in the
no,
work we do, we'll often go kind of over the top. Where we might ask
right.
people to do things that they probably wouldn't really do.
We go over the top. And a good example of that is, and I'm not sure if I've mentioned this on here before, but it's one of our former coworkers had a client who's had social anxiety and was worried about people thinking that they were stupid. He was stupid, and he put the last thing on his list was go to a Foot Locker or a shoe store and ask where the diapers are. So that's obviously not something we would normally do every day, but if you could do that and be okay with it, you can probably go and have a conversation with somebody with the worry of the thought of someone being that they might think you were stupid.
Yeah.
Because you're pretty much putting yourself in a position where they're going to think there's something wrong with you if you ask that question.
You do not know where you are, among
Yes.
other things. But wait a minute, Paul. It could be that somebody says, "Yeah, we do. We have some sports diapers right over here."
That might happen. You never know.
Yeah. Maybe
but
somebody's going to invent that as a result of this podcast.
That's right. You're right. For those people who are doing exposure in our store, we're going to have this outrageous thing that we're going to make it normal.
Exactly.
Right? They're going to have a lot of extra sports diapers, I think. Probably.
We may have to contrive that one.
So anyway, that's a good point about going further past what we would normally go to. It's the same thing. We've talked about this with contamination. We don't normally go and rub our hands on a dirty toilet, in public, but for exposure, if someone can do that, then they can live their life and use a public bathroom.
Absolutely.
And not have to wash their hands repeatedly, right? If they can get used to that feeling, then they'll be used to the normal stuff. Okay, so the next one we have here would be order food at a restaurant for some.
Yeah, difficult thing for particularly kids
for kids to do that. So them saying it in the drive-through or ordering it, in person at the checkout line, paying using the credit card, taking it up there because you have to interact with this person. Trying to make eye contact, and that's where you can combine it, make eye contact. While ordering the food, while submitting the credit card. Those things are good exposure practices. And so that one may be, that may be a 6 for a teenager, but 6 up there.
Right. Yeah, I think so.
And these are going to be different for different people. All right. Carry on a conversation with a person of higher status.
Oh, man, a higher status person.
Somebody that's in position to judge.
Yeah.
Is perceived to be in a position to judge. So that's maybe a little bit more difficult. That might be a 7.
Might be. I want to talk to the mayor.
Okay. And then the next is speak to an attractive person, someone that you think is attractive, another form of higher status, maybe.
Oh, man. Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah.
Put a little pressure on you. You really want an attractive person to respond well. So that may be an 8.
That might be getting up there close to the panic attack.
And then going to a concert or a sporting event or another gathering where you have a lot of strangers and maybe interacting with those is, some a little closer to the party where there's some kind of a lot of people there. There's people that you don't know. It's another step towards working towards going to the party and having a lower level of anxiety and being able to enjoy it. So maybe that one is an 8, we'll say.
Okay.
For someone. So this is just an example of just write it down. And then the other things that we'll go into now, but we can get into what the intrusive thought is in each of those situations. How do we typically avoid that so that we're aware of how to resist that? What's the core fear, and then what's the healthy response? We want to get eventually into focusing on practicing those healthy responses instead of the avoidance.
Yes, yes. So this comes right out of our example where the fear is that they may think I'm stupid, right?
Right.
So we're working our way up through this social anxiety, these examples that somebody pulled off of their stress log from their own personal experience that has created a situation where they tend to avoid doing things socially, which is can be quite impairing, debilitating, because
Yep.
we need to be able to interview for a job. We need to be
Yep.
able to work with coworkers.
Yeah, and a lot of times, before you kind of write it down and do step-by-step process, it's really easy for someone to just get overwhelmed with all of it. And so they just avoid all of it. And they don't see that, there's a process of breaking it down into very small steps that are doable. And we talk about that all the time, is the more you can break things down into doable steps, you want to gather some momentum of some movement instead of it's all bad, avoid all of it. And then that leads to avoid more. And then that leads to more, avoid more, which ultimately leads to more anxiety. It's lowers the anxiety in the moment of having to deal with this situation, but ultimately anxiety increases. So
it doesn't address the problem.
These steps of the stress log and the hierarchy allows someone to write and look at this specific thing that I've identified as low, and I can do this, and this is my goal. I'm not gonna do all of it once. I'm not gonna go give a speech to 250 people on a subject that I don't know anything about.
Oh yes.
To start, I'm gonna just work on making eye contact as I walk by strangers at a public place, and then I'm gonna record how uncomfortable that was, and see if they can disconfirm the belief. Did the worst thing happen?
So imagine this, to give a practical example of doing this work with somebody. If you and I go into a mall with somebody who has the task of working on making eye contact. So if you're in a mall and you walk around through a mall, you can see 50 people every time you make a little round. So there's an opportunity to look at people. You're not right up in their face. You have some distance. So that's a little separation. And usually it's a little bit easier. Right. And you and I tell people, if you can't make eye contact, look them in the nose, because they can't tell where you're looking anyhow. And we're just trying to look toward their face, right, to make that step. And then you can get a high frequency of exposure doing that kind of thing. And we can break it down even further, but you get 50 or 100 exposures in a 30-minute period, and you repeat that every day, and you get pretty desensitized or habituated to it.
The level starts coming down, and something really neat might happen, and that you might get some enjoyment out of it.
Oh my.
Think about walking and making eye contact with someone and getting a smile back. You've just made this connection with someone that feels good.
Yes. And
so it can turn, this process can turn anxiety into, this is a good experience. It's a really good example with the guy that asked about the diapers. I mean, he wanted to do it. He put it on there. He didn't really think he was going to do it, but he got so confident because he worked up his way. He was really looking, he thought this was the greatest thing he could do. And think about what happened from the beginning where, oh, that's the worst thing. I would never do that.
Mhm.
He was excited. So it's really powerful tool to use, and it's a
Yes.
powerful step process,
Mhm.
and you're ultimately training your brain to change.
Yes.
You're training your brain to change the way it responds to something that was really scary and really uncomfortable to something that's either low level of anxiety that's you can work past, or something that doesn't bother you at all.
Yes. Hey, Paul, do you think we could maybe do some more of these different examples other than social anxiety? We could do performance anxiety. We could do,
Absolutely.
yeah, we could
Yeah.
do how to treat a phobia. If you have a fear of
Phobias, we
heights.
could do school
Yes. Yeah. School
anxiety,
avoidance.
because it's the same. I mean, it's kind of the
Mhm.
same thing. Maybe it's it might be boredom, or it might be uninterested, unmotivated. It's
Mhm.
still a feeling
Mhm.
that drives a child away from doing their work.
Mhm.
It may be they have ADHD, and it really takes a lot of mental energy to focus, and so their way to
Mhm.
avoid is to trail off and to
Yeah.
to get in trouble, so they don't have to do the work because can't deal with that feeling. So it's the same
Mhm.
kind of thing. It's being able to come over the hierarchy of, all right, let's see if you can focus on this for 1 minute. It's small steps, and tolerate this urge to get off of it, or to avoid it. So it really works with any kind of uncomfortable feeling that leads to avoidance.
You can learn more about how to do this because we have examples of how to do this in our workbook, by the way.
Writing and Living Your Fears Away. It's right in there.
Right. It's on
That's right.
Amazon.com. So if you want to go there, Writing and Living Your Fears Away, you can read about anxiety and the treatment of anxiety. But I think we should do more of this. I
Let's do some
think
more. Yeah,
if you
we'll do those next
give us
time.
a problem, we can probably create a hierarchy.
That's right. That's right. So that hopefully people who are watching this will subscribe and review us and give us some suggestions about, hey, we need an example, or I need an example on this kind of anxiety or this kind of stress, building a hierarchy, and we'd be glad to do that.
Sounds like a challenge.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for watching, and hope you have a great day, and keep minding the gap.
Absolutely.